when three identical 8-year-old girls burst into a millionaire's wedding and accused his bride of abandoning them on the streets. Everything changed in an instant. What they revealed about the perfect woman would shatter his world, but save his life. This is the incredible true story of betrayal, courage, and how three little heroes turned a devastating lie into the most beautiful family anyone could imagine. You won't believe what happens next. Watch until the end. This story will restore your faith in love. Subscribe if you have not done it yet. Let's begin. Ethan Matthews stood before the bathroom mirror, adjusting his silver tie for the 6th time. His hands, usually steady when signing million-dollar deals, trembled slightly in the morning light streaming through his penthouse window. At 38, he had everything. A tech empire built from nothing, a corner office on the 40th floor, and respect from every businessman in the city. But today was different. Today, he was getting married. You ready for this? Tyler Brooks called through the bedroom door, his best man's voice carrying a hint of concern they both pretended not to notice. Ethan took a deep breath, studying his reflection. 6 months ago, he would have laughed at anyone who suggested he'd be standing here, preparing to promise his life to someone else. 6 months ago, he was convinced he was better off alone. Then Victoria Sterling walked into his life. The church bells rang across downtown as guests filled the pews of St. Catherine's Cathedral. White roses lined the aisle, their sweet fragrance mixing with the scent of old wood and candle wax. Ethan's business associates sat in the front rows, their approving nods confirming what everyone already knew. Victoria was perfect for him. As the organist began the wedding march, Ethan's mind drifted to that February evening when everything changed. He'd been exhausted after a 14-hour negotiation that nearly fell apart twice. The hotel bar was nearly empty when he ordered his usual whiskey, neat, and loosened his tie. That's when he saw her. Victoria sat at the far end of the bar, elegant fingers wrapped around a martini glass. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves just past her shoulders, and she wore a navy dress that somehow made her the most striking woman in the room without trying. When their eyes met, she raised her glass in a silent toast. Her phone slipped from her purse, sliding across the polished floor to his feet. "I think your phone prefers my company," he said, handing her the device. She smiled, not the practiced smile he was used to from women who knew his net worth, but something genuine and warm. "I don't blame it." That was all it took. Now, standing at the altar watching her approach in her flowing white dress, Ethan marveled at how completely she'd transformed his world. Victoria was everything he'd never known he wanted. Intelligent, independent, confident. She challenged him in board meetings they attended together, made him laugh during quiet dinners, and somehow understood his need for order and control. She was perfect. Too perfect. The thought flickered through his mind like a warning, but he pushed it away. Victoria reached the altar, her green eyes meeting his with that same mysterious smile that had captivated him 6 months ago. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice echoing through the cathedral, "we are gathered here today." The massive wooden doors burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Everyone turned. Ethan's heart stopped. 3 small girls stood in the doorway, breathing hard as if they'd run miles to get there. They were identical, triplets with shoulder-length brown hair and wide, serious eyes that held far too much pain for children so young. Their clothes were worn and dirty, their faces thin with hunger, but they stood with a dignity that made Ethan's chest tighten. "She heard us," the first girl said, her clear voice cutting through the stunned silence. "And after our father died, you left us on the street." Ethan felt the world tilt. He turned to Victoria, expecting to see confusion, maybe concern for these obviously distressed children. Instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Fear. Pure, undiluted terror flashed across Victoria's face before she quickly composed herself, slipping back into the poised mask he'd grown to admire. But he'd seen it. That split second of panic told him everything he needed to know. These children knew her. Security. Victoria's voice cut through the shocked murmurs of the wedding guests. Can someone please remove these children? They're obviously confused. But Ethan stepped forward, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. Something about the way the three girls stood, protective of each other, united in their accusation, made him listen instead of dismiss. What are your names? He asked gently, kneeling to their level. The tallest of the three, who couldn't have been more than 8, lifted her chin with remarkable poise. I'm Emma. These are my sisters, Grace and Sophie. We're the daughters of David Harrison. A collective gasp rose from the congregation. Ethan felt Victoria's hand grip his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging through his suit jacket. Ethan, please, she whispered urgently. This is clearly some kind of con. Look at them, they're street children. Someone sent them here to get money from us. But the name David Harrison echoed in Ethan's mind. He studied Victoria's face, searching for any sign of recognition. I've never heard that name in my life, Victoria said firmly, but her voice carried a slight tremor that hadn't been there moments before. You married our father, Sophie, the smallest triplet, said with devastating simplicity. 2 years ago in our backyard. We held flowers. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions, from manufactured confusion to calculated anger, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This is ridiculous, Victoria announced to the entire church, her voice rising. I've never been married before. I've never seen these children in my life. Someone has obviously coached them to ruin our wedding day. But Emma, with wisdom far beyond her years, stepped closer to the altar. You told us our daddy gave us too much attention. You said we were too loud. When he got sick, you made us stay in the basement so he could rest. Grace added quietly, and when he died, you put our clothes in garbage bags and changed the locks. The cathedral erupted in whispers. Several guests stood to leave, uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. But Ethan remained frozen, studying the woman he'd thought he knew. Victoria turned to him, her green eyes pleading. Ethan, you can't possibly believe this. After everything we've shared, everything we've built together, you're going to let 3 lying children destroy our future. The calculated nature of her words struck him. Even now, she was manipulating, playing on his emotions rather than simply denying the accusations with genuine shock. I think, Ethan said slowly, his voice carrying through the microphone, we need to postpone this ceremony. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. The gentle, understanding woman he'd fallen in love with vanished, replaced by someone cold and furious. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, she hissed, loud enough for the front rows to hear. I wasted 6 months on you. She gathered her white dress and stormed down the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. At the cathedral doors, she turned one final time. They're lying, she declared to the entire congregation. And you're a fool, Ethan Matthews. The doors slammed behind her with a finality that echoed through the vast space. The 3 girls stood quietly for a moment, their mission apparently complete. Then, without asking for anything, no money, no help, nothing, they turned and walked toward the exit with the same dignity they'd shown when they arrived. Wait, Ethan called, but they were already gone. The cathedral emptied slowly, guests murmuring among themselves as they filed out. Tyler approached, placing a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. I'm sorry, man, was all he said. Jennifer Walsh, Ethan's assistant, appeared at his side. Ethan, are you all right? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Matthews had no idea what was true and what was a lie. 3 days later, Ethan sat in his office high above the city, watching rain streak down the floor-to-ceiling windows. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time since the wedding, his mind spinning with questions that demanded answers. Michael Chin, his attorney and closest friend, entered without knocking, something he only did in emergencies. "I have information," Michael said, setting a thick folder on Ethan's desk. "And you're not going to like it." Ethan steeled himself. "Tell me everything." Michael opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and official records. David Harrison, 39, professor of English literature at City College, died 8 months ago from complications related to a congenital heart condition. The first photograph showed a gentle-faced man with kind eyes and graying brown hair, smiling at the camera. Something about his expression, open, honest, warm, made Ethan's chest tighten. He was married to Sarah Harrison, who died 3 years ago from breast cancer, Michael continued. They had identical triplet daughters, Emma, Grace, and Sophie Harrison, now 8 years old. Each name hit Ethan like a physical blow. The children had been telling the truth. "And Victoria?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer would change everything. Michael slid another document across the desk. Victoria Sterling married David Harrison 18 months ago, 6 months after Sarah's death. Small backyard ceremony, just as the girls described. The wedding photograph made Ethan's stomach turn. Victoria, radiant in a simple blue dress, stood beside David with her arm around his waist. 3 smaller girls, so much younger than, still round-cheeked with innocence, held tiny bouquets of wildflowers. A family. Victoria had been part of a real family. What happened after David died? Ethan asked, though he dreaded the answer. The house was sold within 2 weeks of the funeral. Victoria handled the entire transaction. Michael's voice turned grim. There's no official record of what happened to the children after that. No record. No adoption papers, no custody transfer, no entry into the foster system. But there was a police report filed by a neighbor who claimed to see 3 young children sleeping in Riverside Park. By the time officers arrived, the children were gone. Ethan closed his eyes, imagining Emma, Grace, and Sophie, so small, so vulnerable, trying to survive on the streets. The image made him physically ill. "There's more," Michael continued reluctantly. Victoria moved to this city 1 week after selling the house. Her entire professional history here was fabricated. The marketing consultancy she claimed to run, registered 6 months ago, right around the time she met you. And before David? Michael hesitated. There was another man. Martin Reynolds, a widowed businessman. Victoria married him quickly after they met. He died 6 months later, leaving her a substantial inheritance. The pattern was becoming sickeningly clear. Natural causes? Officially, yes. Both deaths were investigated and deemed natural. But the timing. Ethan stood and walked to the window, watching tiny figures move through the streets below. Somewhere in this city, 3 little girls were fighting to survive because the woman he'd almost married had thrown them away like trash. "Find them," he said without turning around. "Ethan." "Find them, Michael. Use every resource we have. Hire private investigators, security teams, whatever it takes. I need to know they're safe." "What about Victoria?" Ethan's reflections stared back at him from the rain-streaked glass. "I never want to see her again. But I need to find those children." Michael gathered the files. "I'll start immediately. Full team, round-the-clock search." After his friend left, Ethan remained at the window as darkness fell over the city. His phone buzzed with text messages from Victoria, pleading, angry, then threatening, but he didn't read them. Instead, he thought about 3 brave little girls who had risked everything to save a stranger from making the worst mistake of his life. He would find them, and somehow he would make this right. Hamilton Square looked like a scene from a storybook, with ancient oak trees creating a canopy over winding paths and weathered benches. On this cloudy Thursday morning, It was nearly empty except for a few joggers and an elderly man feeding pigeons. Ethan had been searching for 4 days when Michael's team finally got a lead. A shopkeeper had seen 3 identical girls selling homemade candy near the square's fountain. The description matched perfectly. Walking slowly through the park, Ethan spotted them before they saw him. Under the largest oak tree, 3 small figures sat on a bench that had seen better days. Emma was organizing something in a shoebox, while Grace and Sophie watched passers-by with the wariness of children who'd learned too young that the world could be dangerous. Ethan's heart broke at the sight of them. They were thinner than they'd been at the church, their clothes more worn, their faces bearing the hollow look of children who never knew where their next meal would come from. He approached slowly, hands visible, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. All 3 noticed him immediately. Emma nudged her sisters, and they moved closer together, a protective instinct that spoke of weeks spent relying only on each other. "Hello," Ethan said gently, stopping several feet away. "Do you remember me?" The girls studied him with identical pairs of serious brown eyes. Finally, Grace spoke. "You were going to marry her." "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not marrying Victoria. That's over." Something like relief flickered across their faces, but they remained guarded. "Why are you here?" Emma asked, her voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I wanted to find you, to make sure you're okay, and to hear your story, if you're willing to tell it." "Why?" Sophie whispered. Ethan chose his words carefully. These children had been betrayed by every adult who was supposed to protect them. They deserved nothing but truth. "Because you saved my life that day at the church. And because I think you deserve someone who will listen." The sisters exchanged one of their silent communications, a language of glances and tiny gestures that somehow conveyed entire conversations. "You can sit," Emma finally said, indicating the empty space on the bench. Ethan sat carefully, keeping distance between them. In the shoebox, he could see small chocolate truffles wrapped in colorful paper. "Are you selling candy?" "Our mom taught us how to make them," Grace said softly, "before she got sick." "Sarah," Ethan said gently. "Your mother's name was Sarah." All 3 girls looked startled. "How do you know that?" Emma asked, suddenly alert. "I hired someone to find out the truth about what happened to you. About your father, too. David Harrison." Tears immediately filled their eyes at their father's name. Sophie moved closer to her sisters, seeking comfort. "He was the best daddy in the world," she whispered. "Tell me about him," Ethan said. For the next hour, the story emerged in pieces. David Harrison had been a devoted father who read to his daughters every night, made animal-shaped pancakes on Sunday mornings, and took them on long walks where they made up stories about the shapes in clouds. When Sarah died, David had struggled but managed, getting help from neighbors and adjusting his teaching schedule to be home when the girls returned from school. Then she came, Emma said, her young voice hardening. "At Mommy's funeral. Victoria told everyone she was Mommy's friend from college," Grace added. "But Mommy never talked about her." "Daddy was so sad," Sophie said. "He believed her when she said she wanted to help." The courtship had been swift. Victoria brought gifts, cooked dinners, and seemed genuinely interested in becoming part of their family. David, grieving and overwhelmed, had been grateful for the help. "The wedding was in our backyard," Emma remembered. "We wore yellow dresses and carried daisies from Daddy's garden." "At first, she was nice," Grace continued. "But after they got married, everything changed." The story that unfolded made Ethan's blood run cold. Victoria had gradually isolated David from his daughters, complaining that they were too loud, too demanding, too needy. When David was at work, she'd send them to their rooms for hours at a time. Their artwork disappeared from the refrigerator. Their toys began vanishing. "She said Daddy didn't love us as much as he loved her," Sophie said, tears streaming down her face. She said we were just reminders of his dead wife. When David's heart condition worsened, Victoria used his illness to justify even harsher treatment. The girls were banished to the basement during his home recovery periods, told their noise was making him sicker. We tried to tell him, Emma said, but she was always so sweet when he was around. And he was so tired from being sick. David's final hospitalization had lasted 2 weeks. The girls weren't allowed to visit, Victoria claiming it would be too upsetting for everyone involved. He died alone, with only Victoria by his side. At the funeral, she cried and cried, Grace said bitterly. Everyone felt so sorry for her. But the mask had come off immediately after the service. Within days, Victoria was packing the house, selling furniture, and making arrangements to move to another city. She put our clothes in trash bags, Emma said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. All our pictures of Daddy and Mommy, all our toys, everything that mattered to us gone. The last day, she changed the locks while we were at school, Sophie added. Our backpacks were on the porch with a note that said we weren't her problem anymore. The girls had spent their first night on the porch, hoping Victoria would change her mind. When morning came and a realtor arrived with a sold sign, they finally understood. They were truly on their own. Why didn't you go to the police? Ethan asked gently. Victoria told people we were going to live with relatives, Emma explained. When Mrs. Chen next door tried to help, Victoria said we were just acting out because we didn't want to move. No one believed us. They'd learned to survive on the streets with heartbreaking efficiency. Public bathrooms, park fountains for water, sleeping under bridges when it rained. A kind bakery owner let them use her oven to make candy in exchange for sweeping floors. We take care of each other, Emma said with fierce pride. We're never separated. How did you find out about my wedding? We saw your picture in the newspaper, Grace said. At the bakery. Mrs. Chin gives us old papers to keep warm. We recognized her right away, Sophie added. She was smiling in the photo, looking so happy and perfect. Just like she did with our daddy. We couldn't let her do it again, Emma said simply. We couldn't let her hurt someone else the way she hurt us. Ethan sat in stunned silence, processing their incredible courage. These children, homeless, hungry, and utterly vulnerable, had risked their safety to save a complete stranger. The rain that had been threatening all morning finally began to fall, first as scattered drops, then as a steady drizzle. Do you have somewhere dry to stay? Ethan asked, noticing them glance nervously at the darkening sky. Emma hesitated. We have a place. Under the park bridge, Sophie added, earning a sharp look from her older sister. Ethan made a decision that would change all their lives forever. I have a proposal, he said calmly. My apartment has guest rooms that are never used. Clean beds, hot water, warm food. Just until the storm passes. The girls exchanged their silent communication while rain began dripping through the tree canopy. Why would you help us? Emma asked warily. Because it's the right thing to do. And because you helped me when you didn't have to. We don't need charity, Grace said with fierce pride. It's not charity. It's what family does for each other. The word family hung in the air between them. Finally, as the rain intensified, Emma nodded. Just until the storm passes, she said. Just until the storm passes. Ethan agreed, knowing it was only the beginning. Ethan's penthouse apartment had never felt so alive. The sound of children's voices echoed through rooms that had known only silence for years. 3 small pairs of shoes lined up by the entrance. Colorful drawings appeared on his refrigerator, and for the first time in his adult life, Ethan understood what home really meant. The girls had been with him for 2 weeks, slowly learning to trust that this safety was real. Jennifer had worked miracles, appearing with children's clothes, books, toys, and enough art supplies to transform his sterile living space into something warm and welcoming. Emma, Grace, and Sophie were beginning to heal, each in their own way. Emma, the natural leader, had appointed herself household organizer, making sure beds were made and homework was done. Her favorite spot was Ethan's study, where she'd curl up with advanced books far beyond her grade level, her sharp mind hungry for knowledge. Grace had claimed the kitchen as her domain, standing on a step stool to help Jennifer prepare meals with enthusiasm that reminded Ethan of her father's love for teaching. She was also the peacemaker, always making sure her sisters felt included and safe. Sophie, the gentlest soul, had slowly begun to open up, humming while she drew elaborate pictures of families, always families, and leaving them around the apartment like tiny gifts. But it was the small moments that affected Ethan most deeply. The first night they'd stayed, he'd heard Sophie crying softly from their room. When he'd knocked gently and asked if she needed anything, she'd whispered through the door, "I miss my daddy." "I know," he'd said, sitting outside their room. "Can you tell me about him?" For an hour, she'd shared memories through the closed door while her sisters listened. David reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character. David teaching them to ride bikes in the park. David letting them help grade papers when they promised to be very, very quiet. "He called us his 3 miracles," Sophie had said finally. "Because Mommy couldn't have babies for a long time, and then we all came together." "You are miracles," Ethan had replied, meaning every word. Now, watching them argue over which movie to watch on this rainy Sunday evening, Ethan felt a contentment he'd never known existed. But underneath the happiness was a growing anxiety about their future. Michael had been working on the legal situation, but it was complicated. Without any living relatives and no official custody arrangements, the girls existed in a legal gray area. Ethan had the means to provide for them, but no legal right to keep them safe. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Michael's name appeared on the screen. "I need to take this call," Ethan told the girls, who nodded and continued their animated discussion about superheroes versus princesses. "What do you have?" Ethan asked, stepping into his study. "Good news and complicated news," Michael replied. "The good news is that I found someone." David Harrison had a younger sister, Rebecca. She's a literature professor at State University, about 2 hours upstate. Ethan's heart sank even as relief flooded through him. Family. The girls had family. What's the complicated part? She didn't know David had children. They'd been estranged for years. Some family dispute over their parents' estate. She's devastated about his death and shocked about the girl's existence. What kind of person is she? From everything I can tell, a good one. Never married, no children of her own, but well established in her career. Clean background, financially stable. She seems genuinely eager to meet her nieces. When? She's driving down tomorrow afternoon. 2 o'clock, if that works. Ethan closed his eyes, processing the mix of emotions. Joy that the girls would have blood family who wanted them. Terror at the thought of losing them. Guilt for feeling that terror when he knew this was what was best for Emma, Grace, and Sophie. "Set it up," he said finally. "But Michael? Make sure she understands these children have been through hell. They need patience, understanding, and above all, they need to stay together." Already covered. She seems to understand the gravity of the situation. After hanging up, Ethan stood at his study window, looking out over the city lights. Tomorrow, everything would change again. From the living room came the sound of laughter, pure, innocent laughter that had been missing from their voices when he'd found them. Whatever happened next, at least they'd had these 2 weeks of safety, of being children again. "Ethan," Grace called from the kitchen. "Can you help us make hot chocolate? Sophie wants extra marshmallows, but Emma says that's too many." "Coming," he called back, smiling despite the ache in his chest. He would tell them about their aunt tomorrow. Tonight, he just wanted to savor this perfect, ordinary moment of being a family. Rebecca Harrison looked exactly like her brother. She had David's gentle brown eyes, his slightly graying hair, and the same quiet intelligence that radiated from her expression. But what struck Ethan most was the way she carried herself, with dignity and purpose, much like Emma did. She sat across from him in the downtown cafe they'd chosen for their meeting, a manila folder of old photographs spread between them on the small wooden table. "I brought these," she said softly, touching one of the pictures. "I thought the girls might want to see them." The photograph showed two children, David, maybe 10 years old, and Rebecca, slightly younger, building a treehouse in the backyard of a modest suburban home. Both were covered in sawdust and grinning at the camera. "We built that in one summer," Rebecca continued, her voice thick with emotion. David insisted on doing most of the work himself, even though he was terrible with tools. He hit his thumb with the hammer more times than he hit any nails. Despite his anxiety about this meeting, Ethan found himself smiling. The girls mentioned he wasn't very handy. God no. But he never gave up. That was David, determined to do everything himself, especially when it came to taking care of people he loved. She picked up another photograph, this one showing teenage David and Rebecca at what looked like a high school graduation. "We were so close growing up. Best friends, really. I can't believe I let pride keep us apart for so long." "What happened between you?" Rebecca sighed, looking older than her 42 years. "Our parents died in a car accident when David was 25 and I was 23. They left us the family house, the same one where we built that treehouse. David wanted to sell it immediately, said it was too painful to keep. I wanted to preserve it, turn it into some kind of memorial." She shook her head, clearly still processing her own choices. "We said terrible things to each other. I accused him of not caring about our parents' memory. He said I was being sentimental and impractical. Both of us were just grieving in different ways, but we were too stubborn to see it." "You never reconciled?" "We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, but they got more and more formal. When I heard he'd gotten married, I thought about reaching out, but..." She trailed off, tears threatening. "I kept thinking there would be time later. There's always supposed to be time later." Ethan understood that regret intimately. How many relationships had he neglected, thinking he could repair them eventually? "Tell me about the girls," Rebecca said, wiping her eyes discreetly. How are they coping?" For the next hour, Ethan shared everything. Finding them in the park, their courage in surviving on the streets, their gradual healing over the past 2 weeks. He told her about Emma's fierce protectiveness, Grace's gift for bringing people together, and Sophie's gentle artistic nature. "They're remarkable children," he concluded. "Stronger than most adults I know." Rebecca listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to analyzing literature, asking thoughtful questions and nodding at the right moments. But what impressed Ethan most was her anger when he described their treatment by Victoria. "How could anyone abandon children?" she asked, her voice shaking with fury. "They just lost their father. They were grieving and terrified, and she threw them away like garbage." "That's exactly what happened," Ethan confirmed grimly. "And you've been caring for them ever since?" "They've been caring for me," Ethan corrected. "I had no idea what I was missing until they showed up in my life." Rebecca studied him carefully. "This must be difficult for you, knowing they have family now." Ethan appreciated her directness. "I want what's best for them. If that means living with you, then I'll support that completely. But I also want you to know that if you'll allow it, I'd like to remain part of their lives." "Mr. Matthews." "Ethan, please." "Ethan, from everything you've told me, you saved these children's lives. You gave them stability and love when they had nothing. Of course you'll remain part of their lives. That is, if they want to come live with me at all. Are you prepared for 3 children at once?" "It's a big adjustment." Rebecca smiled, the same gentle expression Ethan had seen in David's photographs. "I have a large house with plenty of bedrooms, a good job with flexible hours, and substantial savings. Financially, I can provide for them. Emotionally, She paused, choosing her words carefully. I can't replace their father, but I can offer them love, stability, and most importantly, family. What about your career? I'm a tenured professor. I can adjust my schedule, maybe take a sabbatical if needed. These girls are my brother's children, my only connection to him now. They're more important than any career. As they talked, Ethan found himself genuinely liking Rebecca Harrison. She was thoughtful, obviously intelligent, and her love for David came through in every word. More importantly, she understood the magnitude of what she was offering. When would you like to meet them? He asked finally. Whenever you think they're ready. I don't want to rush anything. This afternoon? At my apartment, where they feel safe. Rebecca nodded, then hesitated. What if they don't like me? What if they're not ready for another change? Then we'll figure it out together, Ethan assured her. These girls have been through more than most people experience in a lifetime. They're wise enough to know what they need. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Rebecca gathered the photographs carefully. I brought one more thing, she said, pulling a worn children's book from her purse. David's favorite when we were kids. I thought maybe they'd like to hear it read to them. Ethan recognized the book, Where the Red Fern Grows, and felt his throat tighten. They'd love that. Walking back to his building, Ethan felt the strange sensation of his world shifting again. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a bachelor businessman with a carefully ordered life. Then 3 brave little girls had changed everything, and now this kind woman would change it again. But for the first time since the church, Ethan felt peace about the future. Whatever happened next, Emma, Grace, and Sophie would be loved and protected. That was all that mattered. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows as Ethan introduced Rebecca to the 3 girls who had become the center of his world. Emma, Grace, and Sophie sat on the couch, dressed in their favorite outfits, hair carefully braided, watching their newly discovered aunt with the intense scrutiny only children could manage. Rebecca sat in the armchair across from them, the manila folder of photographs on the coffee table between them, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Hello, she said softly. My name is Rebecca. I'm your daddy's sister. The girls remained silent, that familiar wordless communication passing between them. Finally, Emma, always the spokesperson, spoke up. We didn't know Daddy had a sister. He never told us about any family, Grace added, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her voice steady. That's because your daddy and I had a fight a long time ago, before you were born. A very silly fight about things that didn't matter. I've regretted it every day since. Sophie, the most intuitive of the 3, tilted her head. What did you fight about? Our house, the house where we grew up. After our parents died, I wanted to keep it and your daddy wanted to sell it. We both said mean things and stopped talking to each other. She reached for the folder, hands slightly trembling. But I brought some pictures of your daddy when he was little. Would you like to see them? The transformation was immediate. All 3 girls scooted forward, their wariness replaced by eager curiosity. Rebecca spread the photographs across the coffee table, and the girls leaned in to study each one. This is your daddy when he was about your age, Rebecca said, pointing to the picture of young David with his missing front tooth. He'd lost that tooth the day before when he tried to open a bottle with his teeth. Grace giggled, the first sound any of them had made since Rebecca arrived. Daddy always told us never to do that. That's because he learned the hard way, Rebecca said, smiling. He spent weeks walking around with that gap-toothed grin. She pointed to another photo. And this is both of us building a treehouse in our backyard. See how serious we look. Did you finish it? Emma asked, tracing the outline of young David with her finger. We did. It took us the whole summer, and your daddy insisted on doing most of the work himself, even though he was terrible with tools. He couldn't even hang pictures straight, Sophie said quietly, then looked surprised at herself for speaking. Rebecca laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. Some things never change. He once tried to build your mother a bookshelf for her birthday. It was so crooked. The books kept sliding off. The girls exchanged glances, and Grace spoke up. Mommy loved it anyway. She called it the Leaning Tower of Literature. That sounds exactly like something Sarah would say, Rebecca replied, her voice soft with affection. Your daddy wrote to me about her once, years ago. He said she was the kindest person he'd ever met. The mention of their mother brought a moment of quiet sadness, but it wasn't the crushing grief Ethan had seen in those first days. It was the gentle sadness of precious memories. Do you have any pictures of when Daddy was older? Emma asked. Rebecca pulled out a high school graduation photo. This was when your daddy graduated. He was valedictorian, the smartest student in his whole class. He was the smartest teacher at his school too, Grace said proudly. All his students loved him. I don't doubt that for a second, Rebecca said. He always wanted to be a teacher, even when we were little. He used to line up all his stuffed animals and pretend to give them lessons. Sophie giggled at this image. What did he teach them? Everything. Math, science, how to tie shoes, how to brush their teeth. He was very serious about it. For the next hour, Rebecca shared story after story about David's childhood. The time he tried to teach the neighbor's cat to fetch. His obsession with astronomy that led to him spending entire nights on the roof with a telescope their father had bought him. The way he used to write elaborate stories and illustrate them himself. The girls soaked up every detail, hungry for these glimpses of their father's life before they knew him. Gradually, their rigid posture relaxed. Grace moved closer to see the pictures better. Sophie actually smiled when Rebecca told them about David's failed attempt to train squirrels to come when he whistled. Why didn't you and Daddy make up? Emma asked suddenly, her directness both startling and refreshing. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Pride, she said finally. We were both too proud to admit we were wrong. And then too much time passed, and it became harder and harder to reach out. I kept thinking I'd do it tomorrow, or next week, or next month. But tomorrow never came. That's sad, Sophie said simply. Yes, it is. It's the saddest thing about my whole life. But finding out about you three girls, knowing that part of your daddy is still here in the world, that makes me happier than I've been in years. Emma studied Rebecca's face with those wise eyes that had seen too much. Do you want us to come live with you? The question hung in the air. Ethan held his breath, watching Rebecca's face carefully. I would love that more than anything, Rebecca said honestly. But only if you want to. I have a big house with lots of bedrooms and a yard where we could plant a garden like the one your daddy grew up with. There's even a tree that would be perfect for a treehouse. Would we all get to stay together? Grace asked, the fear evident in her voice. Always, Rebecca said firmly. You three belong together. Anyone can see that. Sophie looked at her sisters, then at Ethan, then back at Rebecca. What about Ethan? Would we still get to see him? Ethan felt his heart constrict, but Rebecca answered before he could speak. Ethan will always be part of your family. He saved you when no one else could, and took care of you when you needed it most. If you come live with me, he'll visit whenever he wants, and you can visit him too. Emma nodded slowly, processing this information. Can we see your house first? Before we decide. Of course. We could drive up this weekend if Ethan doesn't mind coming with us. All three girls turned to look at Ethan with pleading eyes. You'll come with us? Grace asked. If you want me to, he said, his voice rougher than usual. We want you to, Sophie said firmly. We're family now. The simple statement hit Ethan like a physical blow. Family. These three children had somehow expanded his definition of love, responsibility, and belonging in ways he never could have imagined. Rebecca pulled out one final item from her bag, the worn copy of Where the Red Fern Grows. "This was your daddy's favorite book when we were children," she said. "I read it to him probably 100 times. Would you like me to read some of it to you?" The girls nodded eagerly, arranging themselves on the couch. Rebecca settled into the armchair and opened the book to the first page. Billy had been wanting 2 hounds for as long as he could remember. As Rebecca's gentle voice filled the room, Ethan watched the girls lean forward, completely absorbed in the story their father had loved. Emma's analytical mind was already working, asking questions about the characters. Grace was emotionally invested, gasping at the dramatic parts. Sophie simply listened with wonder, her eyes wide with imagination. Watching them, Ethan realized this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of love strong enough to hold space for both grief and joy. When Rebecca finished the first chapter, Emma looked up with shining eyes. "Will you read more tomorrow?" "Every day if you'd like," Rebecca promised. "Even when we move to your house?" Sophie asked. "Especially then." As the afternoon wore on, the invisible barriers between Rebecca and the girls continued to dissolve. She answered their questions patiently, shared more stories about David, and listened with genuine interest as they told her about their life with their father. When it was time for Rebecca to leave, she knelt down to the girls' level. "I know this is all very new and maybe a little scary," she said gently. "But I want you to know that no matter what you decide, I'm so grateful I got to meet you today. You 3 are the best parts of your daddy, and I can see how much he loved you." Emma stepped forward first, extending her hand formally. "Thank you for coming to meet us." But Rebecca gently took Emma's hand and pulled her into a soft hug. "Thank you for letting me." Grace and Sophie joined the embrace, and for a moment, Ethan saw the family they could become, bound not just by blood, but by shared love for the man they'd all lost too soon. After Rebecca left, the girls were unusually quiet during dinner. Finally, as they were clearing the table, Emma spoke. "She seems nice," she said carefully. "She has daddy's eyes," Sophie added. "And she knew all those stories about him," Grace concluded. Ethan waited, letting them process their feelings without pressure. "Ethan," Emma said finally, "if we go live with Aunt Rebecca, will you really still visit us?" "As often as you'll have me," he promised. "And you can call me anytime you want." "Good," Sophie said with relief. "Because we still need you too." That night, as Ethan tucked them into bed, Grace asked the question he'd been dreading. "When would we move to Aunt Rebecca's house?" "Not until you're ready," he said honestly. "And only if you want to. This is your choice. But you think we should go, don't you?" Emma asked with her usual perceptiveness. Ethan sat on the edge of their bed, choosing his words carefully. "I think Rebecca loves your father very much, and she already loves you 3. I think she can give you something I can't, a connection to your daddy and your family history. But I also think you should only go if it feels right to you." "Will you be lonely without us?" Sophie asked, her concern touching him deeply. "I'll miss you terribly," he admitted. "But I'll also be happy knowing you're with someone who loves you and wants to give you the family you deserve." The girls looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Finally, Emma nodded. "We want to see her house this weekend," she announced. "All of us together." "Then that's what we'll do," Ethan agreed. As he turned off their light and headed for the door, Grace's voice stopped him. "Ethan, no matter what happens, you'll always be our first family, right? The one who saved us." "Always," he whispered, his throat tight with emotion. "Always." The drive to Rebecca's house took them through rolling hills dotted with farms and small towns that looked like postcards. Emma sat in the front seat, navigating with the GPS and pointing out interesting landmarks. Grace and Sophie pressed their faces to the back windows, marveling at horses in pastures and old barns weathered gray by time. Rebecca's house sat at the end of a tree-lined driveway, a rambling Victorian with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under every window. It was painted soft yellow with white trim, and looked exactly like the kind of house where children should grow up reading books under spreading oak trees. "It's beautiful," Grace breathed as they pulled into the driveway. "Look at that tree." Sophie pointed to a massive oak in the backyard, its branches perfect for climbing. Rebecca came out to meet them, wiping her hands on a dish towel and smiling nervously. "Welcome. I've been cooking all morning. I hope you're hungry." The interior of the house was warm and inviting, with built-in bookshelves lining every wall and comfortable furniture that invited long conversations. Unlike Ethan's modern penthouse, this felt like a home that had hosted generations of family dinners and bedtime stories. "Your daddy and I used to spend summers here with our grandparents," Rebecca explained as she showed them around. "Our grandfather built most of these bookshelves himself." She led them upstairs to what would be their bedrooms, 3 connected rooms with a shared bathroom, each painted in soft, welcoming colors. "I thought Emma might like this one," Rebecca said, opening the door to a room painted sage green, with a window seat overlooking the backyard. "It gets the best morning light for reading." Emma's eyes lit up at the built-in bookshelves and the desk positioned perfectly by the window. "Grace, this one has easy access to the kitchen," Rebecca continued, showing them a sunny yellow room. "I thought you might like being close to where we cook. And Sophie, this room has the best view of the garden. I was hoping you might help me plant flowers this spring." The lavender room had an easel by the window and art supplies already arranged on a small table. "You bought art supplies?" Sophie asked, touching the new colored pencils reverently. "I thought you might like to draw the view," Rebecca said. "But only if you want to." The girls explored each room thoroughly, testing the beds, examining the closets, and marveling at having so much space. But Ethan noticed they kept gravitating back to each other, still needing that constant reassurance that they wouldn't be separated. "Lunch is ready," Rebecca called from downstairs. The dining room table was set with china that obviously had family history, and Rebecca had prepared all of David's childhood favorites: grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles, tomato soup, and chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. "Daddy used to make grilled cheese for us," Grace said, taking a bite. "But never this good." "Our mother taught me this recipe," Rebecca said. She said the secret was buttering the outside of the bread and using 3 different kinds of cheese. After lunch, Rebecca showed them the rest of the property. The backyard was enormous, with garden beds waiting for spring planting, the perfect climbing tree, and enough space for anything 3 active children could imagine. "We could build a tree house," Emma said, examining the oak tree's sturdy branches. "We could have a garden with vegetables and flowers," Grace added. "And maybe a swing," Sophie said, pointing to a branch that looked perfect for hanging one. "We could do all of those things," Rebecca agreed, "if you decide you'd like to live here." That evening, back at Ethan's apartment, the girls were unusually quiet during dinner. He could practically see them processing everything they'd experienced, weighing their options with the seriousness of much older people. Finally, as they were getting ready for bed, Emma made an announcement. "We want to live with Aunt Rebecca," she said, "but we want to visit you every other weekend. And holidays. And summer vacation. And you have to come see our treehouse when we build it," Grace added. "And call us every night at first," Sophie said, "until we get used to being there." Ethan felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. "Those all sound like excellent terms to me. When can we move?" Emma asked. "Whenever you're ready," Ethan said. "Rebecca's already started the legal paperwork to become your guardian. It should be finalized within a few weeks." "Can we pack our stuff tomorrow?" Sophie asked. "I want to take my drawings to show Aunt Rebecca." "Of course. We'll pack everything you want to take." That night, Ethan stood in the doorway of their room, watching them sleep peacefully for what he knew would be one of the last times. In just a few weeks, they'd be in their new home with Rebecca, beginning the next chapter of their lives. He thought about how much had changed since that Sunday morning when 3 brave little girls had burst into his wedding, They'd saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life, and in return, he'd been privileged to witness their healing, their strength, and their incredible capacity for love. Tomorrow, he'd help them pack their belongings. Next weekend, he'd help them move into Rebecca's house. And then he'd begin learning how to be the kind of family member they deserved. Someone who showed up, who kept promises, who loved without trying to possess. It wasn't the family he'd planned, but it was infinitely better than anything he could have imagined. The treehouse was finally finished. Ethan stood in Rebecca's backyard, admiring the structure that had taken them 3 months of weekends to complete. It wasn't the most professional construction project, the floor was slightly uneven, and one wall had a noticeable lean, but it was sturdy, safe, and absolutely perfect for 3 little girls who had helped design and build every inch of it. It's time for the grand opening. Emma called from the kitchen window. She emerged from the house carrying a tray of Rebecca's famous chocolate chip cookies, followed by Grace with a pitcher of lemonade and Sophie with a handful of wildflowers she'd picked from their garden. Rebecca appeared behind them, carrying the family photo they'd taken last month, the first official picture of their reconstituted family. She'd had it framed specially for the treehouse. "This goes right here," Sophie declared, hanging the photo on the wall next to her latest drawing, a picture of their house with all of them standing in front of it, including Ethan. In the child's artistic interpretation, they were all holding hands and smiling under a rainbow. The transition to Rebecca's house had been smoother than anyone had dared hope. The girls had adjusted quickly to their new school, made friends in the neighborhood, and gradually settled into the rhythms of small-town life. Rebecca had proved to be everything Ethan had hoped, patient, loving, and completely devoted to giving the girls the stable family life they deserved. But the best part was that they'd kept their promise to remain connected. Ethan visited every other weekend, holidays, and random Sundays when he just missed them too much to stay away. They called him every few days with updates about school, friends, and their latest adventures. His penthouse, while quieter now, didn't feel empty. Instead, it felt like a satellite of their larger family constellation, a place where 3 little girls kept pajamas in the guest room and left books scattered on his coffee table. Speech. Speech. Grace called as they all climbed into the treehouse for the official dedication ceremony. Emma stood up, clearing her throat with theatrical importance. "I declare this treehouse officially open for reading, playing, and secret sister meetings. And for grown-ups to visit," Sophie added quickly, "as long as they knock first. And for remembering Daddy," Grace said softly, "because he would have loved this." They all grew quiet for a moment, the bittersweet acknowledgement of David's absence mixing with gratitude for the family they'd built in his memory. "He's proud of you," Rebecca said gently. "All of you. I know he's proud of how brave you were, how you saved Ethan, and how you let me into your lives." "Group hug," Sophie announced, and they all squeezed together in the small space, laughing when the treehouse creaked ominously under their combined weight. Later that evening, as Ethan prepared to drive back to the city, Emma approached him with something wrapped in tissue paper. "We made this for you," she said, handing him the package. Inside was a picture frame decorated with shells, buttons, and small painted flowers. The photo inside showed all of them on the day they'd moved into Rebecca's house, tired, happy, and surrounded by cardboard boxes, but unmistakably a family. "For your office," Grace explained. "So you don't forget us when you're working." "As if I could ever forget you," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. As he hugged each of them goodbye, promising to call during the week and visit again soon, Ethan reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all together. A year ago, he'd been a successful but lonely man, convinced that his ordered, solitary life was exactly what he wanted. He'd been preparing to marry a woman who turned out to be a stranger, planning a future built on lies and manipulation. Then 3 8-year-old girls had burst into his wedding and changed everything. They'd shown him what real courage looked like, the willingness to risk everything to protect someone else. They taught him about resilience, about the strength that comes from love, and about the difference between being alone and being lonely. Most importantly, they'd given him a family. Not the traditional family he'd once imagined, but something better. A chosen family built on love, trust, and the commitment to show up for each other no matter what. As he drove through the evening countryside toward the city, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Thank you for saving us. We love you." He pulled over to respond, "Thank you for saving me first. I love you too." In his rearview mirror, he could see the lights of Rebecca's house growing smaller in the distance. But he wasn't leaving them behind. He was simply going home to his part of their larger story, knowing that next weekend he'd return to help with Grace's science project, listen to Emma's latest book report, and admire whatever Sophie had painted. 6 months ago, 3 little girls had lost everything. Today, they had a loving aunt, a beautiful home, a treehouse of their own, and an extended family that would never let them down again. Sometimes the best families aren't the ones you're born into, but the ones that choose you when you need them most. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that choice goes both ways. The end. We encourage you to like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed the video. Please share your thoughts in the comments section and explore our channel for a diverse range of content, including audiobooks, murder mysteries, psychological thrillers, and classic novels. We strive to provide comprehensive and engaging storytelling experiences. Your visit is highly appreciated, and we are confident you will find content to your liking.